There are moments in life that don't make sense until much later, and by then you realize how close you came to missing everything. For one family in rural Tennessee, that moment came not from a doctor, not from a monitor, not from anything science had prepared them for. It came from a pair of amber eyes that watched through the darkness of a nursery, patient and still, every single night for reasons no one yet understood. It started the year before the baby arrived, on a cold stretch of highway outside of Knoxville, where a young bobcat had been struck by a passing vehicle and left on the shoulder of the road. A couple, Daniel and Mara, spotted the animal on their way home from town. Mara saw it first. She told Daniel to stop. The bobcat was alive, barely, curled in the gravel with one back leg twisted at a wrong angle, its tufted ears flat against its skull, eyes half closed. Most people would have called animal control and kept driving. Daniel pulled off the road. They wrapped the animal in a flannel blanket from the truck bed and drove straight to an emergency wildlife veterinarian 40 minutes away. The vet said the leg could be saved, but it would take weeks of recovery. She was honest with them. Wild animals rarely make full emotional adjustments to domestic environments. Most go back to the wild. Some don't survive the stress of captivity. But Daniel and Mara had already decided. They would give the animal every chance they could. They named him Slate, for the color of his coat in low light. Not quite gray, not quite brown, something in between, like the sky just before a storm settles in. He spent his first 2 weeks in a wire kennel in the laundry room, eating little, watching everything. Mara would sit on the floor a few feet away from the kennel door and simply be there. She didn't reach in, didn't speak much, just let him grow used to the presence of a human who wasn't asking anything of him. Slowly, cautiously, Slate began to eat, then to stand. Then, one morning, to press his broad forehead gently against the kennel wire while Mara sat reading nearby. She didn't move, she didn't make a sound, but she felt it, something shifting. By spring, Slate was moving through the house with the quiet authority of an animal that had decided on his own terms that this place was safe. He wasn't a pet in the traditional sense. He didn't seek affection the way a cat or dog might. He was simply present, watching from doorways, resting on the back porch in the late afternoon sun, tracking the movements of the household with a calm, steady attention that felt ancient and deliberate. He tolerated touch but didn't need it. What he seemed to need more than anything was to observe. When Mara became pregnant, they discussed Slate often. What would they do when the baby came? Daniel had researched bobcats carefully. They were territorial, unpredictable under stress, capable of serious harm if they felt threatened. Every article, every forum, every wildlife expert said the same thing. A wild animal and a newborn in the same home was not a combination anyone should test. They agreed they would keep Slate separated from the nursery. It was the responsible decision. It was the only decision. Their daughter Lily was born on a Tuesday in late October, 7 pounds 4 ounces, with dark hair and a small crease between her brows that Mara said looked like she was already thinking about something important. They brought her home on a Thursday. Slate was in the back room when they arrived. Daniel had made sure of it. But animals notice more than we account for. Before Mara had even set the carrier down, Slate was at the closed door of the back room, not scratching, not crying, just standing at the gap beneath the door, still and silent, scenting the air. Daniel found him there an hour later. The expression on the bobcat's face, if you could call it that, was something he had trouble describing afterward. Not agitation, not hunger, something closer to recognition. They introduced Slate to Lily slowly, carefully, over several days, always supervised, always with the ability to separate them instantly. Slate did not hiss. He did not retreat. He approached the carrier the first time with his ears forward and his body low, the way a cat approaches something it finds genuinely interesting rather than threatening. He sniffed the air near the baby for a long moment, then sat back on his haunches and simply watched. Mara and Daniel exchanged a look over his head that they didn't yet have words for. The nights were when it started. They would put Lily down in the nursery, close the door softly, and within the hour they would hear the faint sound of Slate outside it. Not urgent, not distressed, just there. The first time they let him in, thinking he would settle and lose interest, he walked directly to the crib, stood with his front paws on the rail, looked down at the sleeping baby for nearly a full minute, and then curled himself onto the floor directly beside it. By morning he hadn't moved. For the first few nights, Daniel told himself it was harmless. Slate was calm. Lily was sleeping. Nothing bad was happening. He repeated this quietly, like a man trying to convince himself of something he wasn't entirely sure of. But by the end of the first week, the unease had settled into something harder to dismiss. It wasn't that Slate had done anything wrong. He hadn't. Not once had he shown his teeth. Not once had he flinched toward the baby with anything resembling aggression. But he was still a wild animal, 12 pounds of muscle and instinct that no amount of gentleness had ever fully domesticated. And he was choosing, every single night, to sleep beside a newborn. The combination sat in Daniel's chest like a stone he couldn't put down. They started closing the nursery door. The first night they did it, Slate sat outside in silence for a few minutes. Then he began to scratch. Slow, methodical, patient, not frantic, almost like he was knocking. When that didn't work, he made a sound low in his throat. Not quite a cry, not quite a growl. Something in between that Mara said later reminded her of worry. Daniel opened the door at 2 in the morning just to make it stop. Slate walked in without looking at him, went directly to the crib and lay down. They tried again the following night. Same result. During the days the behavior continued in quieter ways. Slate followed the baby's bouncer from room to room as Mara moved through the house. When Lily cried, he was on his feet before either parent had fully registered the sound. Head up, ears forward, eyes fixed on the child with an intensity that went beyond curiosity. He wasn't reacting to the noise the way an anxious animal might. He was responding to it, the way something attentive responds to information it has been waiting for. Mara began watching him more carefully. She noticed that Slate didn't watch Lily the way he watched birds through the window or squirrels crossing the yard. That was tracking, predatory and focused. This was different. This was something she didn't have a clean word for. Vigil, maybe. The kind of watching that comes not from hunger, but from care. Still, the doubt was there. One evening while Daniel was reading and Slate was stationed beside the crib as usual, he said quietly, "We can't keep doing this." Mara didn't answer right away. "I know," she said finally, but neither of them moved to close the door. It was a Wednesday night, ordinary in every way until it wasn't. Lily had gone down easily. No fussing, no long stretches of rocking. She simply closed her eyes and stilled. Mara had noted it, even felt briefly grateful for it, and went to bed earlier than usual. Slate took his place beside the crib. Daniel checked the monitor, saw nothing unusual, and let himself sleep. Sometime after 2 in the morning, the sound reached them. Not a cry, not the monitor alarming, just Slate, that low, insistent sound in his throat, the one that had become familiar over weeks of closed doors and sleepless compromises. But this time it was different, more urgent, continuous in a way it had never been before. Daniel got there first. Slate was standing with both front paws on the crib rail, nudging the side of Lily's face gently with the flat of his paw. Not rough, not panicked, deliberate, the way you shake someone's shoulder when you need them to wake up. Over and over, soft and steady. Lily was still, too still. Her chest was rising, but slowly, and with a quality that Daniel couldn't immediately name. Something about the rhythm was wrong in a way that didn't announce itself loudly. It was subtle, the kind of thing you could look directly at and still miss. Mara came in behind him and saw his face before she saw anything else. She crossed to the crib immediately. The baby's lips carried the faintest bluish cast in the pale light of the room. Her breathing was shallow and slightly labored, not stopping, not alarming on its own, but not right either, not the deep, loose breathing of a sleeping infant. Something was working harder than it should have been. Slate stepped back from the rail and sat, watching them now instead of the baby. His part, it seemed, was done. They called the pediatric emergency line on the way to the car. The nurse on the phone asked Mara to describe the breathing. When she did, the nurse told her not to wait for morning. In the car, moving fast through empty streets, Daniel glanced in the rearview mirror at Mara holding Lily against her chest, one hand pressed lightly to the baby's back, feeling each breath. He didn't say anything, neither did she. But he thought about Slate, sitting quietly in the nursery, watching the door close behind them, having done the only thing he knew how to do. He had noticed, before the monitor, before the parents, before anyone, he had simply refused to stop watching. The doctors called it laryngomalacia, a softening of the tissue around the airway that made breathing quietly labored, especially during deep sleep. In most cases, they explained, it resolves on its own. But caught early, monitored carefully, managed with the right guidance, the outcomes were almost always good. Caught late, or not at all, it could become something far more serious. The attending physician asked Daniel what had prompted them to come in that night. He paused before answering. "Our cat," he said. The doctor looked at him for a moment, then wrote something down without asking a follow-up question. Sometimes, Daniel thought, the truth is too specific to argue with. They were home by morning. Lily slept in her car seat the whole drive back, her breathing already seeming easier to Mara's ear. Or maybe it was simply that they were listening differently now, with the particular attention of people who had just understood what they'd nearly missed. The road was quiet. The sun was just beginning to color the tree line at the edge of the highway. Mara kept one hand resting on the car seat the entire way. When they walked through the front door, Slate was waiting in the hallway. He didn't rush toward them. He didn't make a sound. He simply stood there, the way he always had, still and present and watching, and then turned and walked back toward the nursery, as if to say the conversation was over, and there was somewhere more important to be. Daniel set up a small cedar bed in the corner of the nursery that afternoon. He placed it beside the crib, at the exact spot where Slate had always chosen to sleep on the floor. It seemed like the least he could do. That night, for the first time, they left the nursery door open without hesitation. Slate curled into his cedar bed, tucked his chin onto his paws, and settled. Lily slept. The monitor cast its pale green light across the ceiling. Outside, the October wind moved through the trees the way it always did, indifferent and steady and old. Daniel stood in the doorway for a long moment before going back to bed. He looked at his daughter. He looked at the animal that had refused, night after night, to be anywhere else. There is a kind of loyalty that doesn't come from training or instruction. It comes from something quieter, something that lives below language, below reason, in the part of a creature that simply knows when it is needed and stays. Slate had been rescued once, on a cold